Hello and welcome to Chapter 9 of the Modern Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Mafuz Chowdhury. I'm here with my co host, Camille. It is great to be back for our second episode since the season break. And for those of you that have been seeing our marketing that we've been doing around our last episode, I think I may be shooting for the stars here, Camille, but I think that may be one of the, if not the best episode we've released yet on the Modern Mindset podcast. I think you and I had a very hot internal conversation about it, and I went as far as took out the text from that and shared it on social media to show how hyped you and I got about it. But tell me a little bit about your thoughts around the last episode. I think we came in swinging from our season break.
Oh yeah, definitely. I felt like it was a lot more. Uh, it just felt very fluid and very like flowy, if that makes sense. We were in the flow state. I feel like, and I think looking back and even watching it back, you can kind of see that. And I felt like we were very intuitive with the conversation itself, despite the fact that we did have a goal, which was to talk about um, what we did talk about. So I kind of liked how, even though we had this kind of topic, which we always do, by the way, is just this time it felt different as we were talking about it. It just everything felt naturally entwined within that topic, if that makes sense. And I just had a really good feeling about it, and I felt like we both brought up some really good, interesting points, and maybe some insights that people haven't really thought of or aren't very popular yet. So I just thought it was, well, it was my favorite episode so far, I think.
In the spirit of it being called better presence, I think that was a big part of it. It's like I really think we were just really present in that episode, and you know what's really fun about our show is that we're always going out and living life and coming back once a week and talking about life, right? So what happens sometimes along the way that gets really fun is that we come back and we're actually catching up on the podcast episode because we haven't seen each other for that week while you and I took off in different directions and live this thing we call life, and we come back and we exchange notes. So I feel like our last episode, a big part of it, if not even like the first 20 minutes, was a lot about just catching up on the last week because so much happened. And the catching up in many ways, although it still relates to the topic at hand, it brought in the fluid part of what I was always hoping this podcast would be. You know, when we first started the show, I kept saying like, listen, I accept the fact that it will never replicate or mirror the real experience of you and I getting together and jamming, because as soon as we hit record, we're kind of going into a focused topic. But I really feel like the last episode was the closest we got into what it would have looked like if you and I got together for a meetup and just chatted. So that was so cool. And in the spirit of always trying to get 1% better, it makes me thrilled that our last two episodes might be our best two episodes yet. And here we go again, yet for another run, which I'm so stoked about. I reached out to you this morning, and only this morning did I tell you that I wanted to focus on a specific topic today. And initially, the topic that I wanted to come in with today was going to be called Better Escape. And the reason I wanted to talk about that is that I've been having a bit of a strange feeling since I've come back from vacation. I've been feeling a little bit off, and yesterday I really felt like I was off. I just like everything around me just felt like I wasn't emotionally there. And the more I thought about it, I was like, nothing is making sense. Like, I'm really happy with everything in my life. Like, things are actually really good. There isn't really a problem. Like, I can't point at something and say, this is why I'm feeling bad today. But I was feeling bad. And decided to take a break and escape for a little bit. And then I came back, and it resulted in me wanting to have today's conversation with you. And it was so interesting that I started off the morning by opening up social media. And it just so happened that today is officially the World Mental Health Day. And so I reached out to you again and I said, listen, instead of better escape, I think what actually makes more sense is let's talk about better mental health. And I think this is a big part of it because sometimes when we come on and have these type of conversations, you know, we're in many ways subconsciously positioning ourselves on some type of a pedestal or some type of a stage that almost looks like we're the experts that don't do anything wrong and we don't have these things that are off about us. You know, just 2 weeks ago, I delivered a keynote around productivity. And to me, sometimes it's a kick in the ass when I think about the fact that, oh man, am I being fake by talking about productivity? And now all of a sudden I'm having an unproductive off day. But the truth is, the realization, and I think it needs to be talked about enough, because if we don't, I feel like a lot of people on the other side that are listening may experience what I think is a terrible feeling, which is feeling like you're the only one having this problem because no one else is talking about it. You feel like you're isolating this problem as an individual problem. But the truth is, when it comes to mental health, it's something that every single person experiences. They have challenges around mental health. Sometimes it's based on external situations. Sometimes it's based on not allowing their internals to be balanced, or something just throws you off and people will have an off day. And I need to point out, because what we're going to walk down today, I suspect, is going to be a very sensitive territory. It is very important to point out that we are not experts in this field. What I'm excited to do today is talk about our experience around mental health. But for anyone that is looking for expertise help or really getting challenged with mental health, I encourage you, especially for my local listeners. I looked it up just before today's episode because I did want to be prepared. For my Canadian listeners, there is the Canadian Mental Health Association. That's cmha.ca. By going to that website, there's a phone number you can call. You can speak with experts. You can do your research there. And for my American listeners, there's also the American Mental Health Association, and I encourage you to look into that as well if you need professional help. But Camille, what I want to talk about today is the experience of what you and I have had over the last many years. Privately, we've talked about a lot about mental health, and I want us to do the best that we can in today's chapter in really outlining what mental health means, and how we've been able to navigate through some of the rough waters of what mental health challenges could look like. But I'd love for you, if you're open to it, to share a little bit about your experience with mental health, and I want to share a little bit of mine as well today.
Sure. I mean, thank you for bringing up that disclaimer as well, because I am an MD, but of course I'm not anyone's doctor and I can't give out um, medical advice. So if you do feel like you can relate to some of these issues, please see a professional. And thank you, Mafus, for presenting the options that they have. I've struggled a lot with mental illness, and mental health and mental illness are feels like two separate things. And I think in this modern day society of the information age that we live in, and the fact that we have all these resources and internet, we can kind of create these new diagnoses. Like new mental illnesses. People create these new labels for for disorders that they think are maybe real, maybe they are, and they haven't been formally put in a box for psychiatrists. But also, we have to point out the possibility that sometimes it's just us hyper focusing on something else and trying to make sense of what's going on. And I think mental health is important to know that it is something you have to maintain. And to be healthy, like with your body, you have to feed it like good nutrition. Same with your mind. You have to feed it good thoughts and good habits. And if you don't take care of your mind, then it's naturally gonna not operate as well as it could. And that can be where you have a poor mental health. But where you have mental illness is when your your mind works in a way and your emotions feed that too, where it becomes disordered and almost uncontrollable to the point where it disrupts your daily functioning. And since I was 13, I've struggled with depression, and it's been a chronic issue, and I had a lot of problems growing up. In my teens, I've attempted suicide a couple of times, and even in my early 20s, I have done it a couple of times as well, and I've been hospitalized twice for it. And I was very suicidal for a long time. I had a lot of anxiety as well, and I was formally diagnosed with a bunch of things, which are social anxiety disorder, panic disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and and I also suffered from uh, hypnagogic hallucinations, meaning that I would have these. I had this disordered sleep that I would sometimes hear or see things right before I go to bed, which naturally fed into my anxiety even more and made it very hard to sleep. So I've struggled through a lot of it, and I did take medication for about 2 or 3 years, and against the advice of my doctor, I did discontinue it. And that's not to say that you shouldn't listen to your doctor. It's just you should also try to fix the underlying issue as well. Unfortunately, the way the system works here in Canada is there's not enough resources available to patients. And it's very difficult to have psychiatrists to have that dedicated time for each individual patient's needs. So you need to be able to work on yourself. Medication isn't isn't a cure. It's to help facilitate your growth out of it. Because what it's supposed to do is change your brain in a way that it increases how it grows. So you have to work on it, meaning that you have to feed this new thought pattern, and medication will help facilitate that growth in that direction. And in order to do that, the best thing to do is work with a therapist that you can trust. And it's very hard to find one, let alone afford one, and then on top of that, one that works for you. Because sometimes it really does make a difference the connection you have with your therapist. So, in the spirit of mental illness, I mean, the worst I've gotten where I've become almost borderline agoraphobic, meaning I was scared to be in crowded spaces. I would get panic attacks in crowded places like malls and stuff. And there was one time I got a panic attack from walking down the street in like in my house. So I was just going for a small walk. 2 minutes in, I just felt like there were my neighbors were like inside looking out their window and judging me, and that was enough for me to have a panic attack. And I literally ran home, and I couldn't breathe. Like it felt like I was dying. Like I couldn't catch my breath. It felt like I was breathing through a straw, and my hands were sweaty. My my fingers were tingling. It was such a scary experience, and and I can go in more detail about other events as well. But the whole point is I'm not perfect either, but I think that's a testament to show that you can get through it. It's just very difficult, and part of the reason you have to accept is that once you have those patterns, sometimes those are learned ones, and it takes a long time to reprogram them. It takes a long time to feel like you're almost in a sense okay, but it's possible.
And I'm regularly blown away and impressed by your willingness to open up on this podcast show. The amount of things you share about yourself is deep down. I'm grateful for that because I know how many people it's going to help. How many people might listen to an episode like this and saying like, "Oh, I thought I was the only one that experiences this. I can't believe Camille goes through that as well." Which now gives them that level of empathy and understanding that, hey, maybe if he was able to get out of it, maybe I can too. So I don't want to break out of this narrative because you've proposed the challenges you're going through, and I feel like we're going to be doing a big disservice if we don't also talk about how you work through it. Do you mind just diving in a bit more about situations like when you felt like you were breathing out of a straw and having these challenges of social interactions and whatnot? What are some of the baby steps you took at first, and how did you later either you overcame it, which I don't know, maybe you did, maybe you're still going through it, but what are you doing right now to get from where you were to who you are today?
Yeah, actually, I had really bad social anxiety. In fact, it was the psychiatrist even called it social phobia, and so I worked with a therapist, and naturally, the antidepressants did help too, in terms of anxiety. But it was to the point where I was scared to talk in front of people. And in fact, I actually got like a panic attack once. I was with my friends. We were playing video games, and we were just joking around. And then one of them asked me a question directly, and I literally freaked out. And so I had to work with a therapist with that, and I had this really interesting homework every week. So the first week, I had to walk down the street and just pay attention to how I feel and kind of look at people. And then it became you look at people and you make eye contact, even if it's for a second, even if it's for a glance, you make eye contact. Then it became you smile at them. Then it became you say hello. Then it was you ask them for directions, or you ask them some sort of question. I had to like actually make some sort of conversation, and with every step of voluntary exposure into what I was afraid of, I became more and more. Well, it wasn't the anxiety was less. It was more that I became stronger and I was able to manage it more, which is the goal in therapy. It's not to eliminate the symptoms because you have to accept that one, they may never go away. But if you can build yourself up stronger, which is the way that we should also frame how we parent our children as well, to make them withstand the pressures of life and to face the unknown willingly, to become more and more of themselves, that's where the true magic lies. And that's how you start fixing the problem. Because the problem is I was avoiding my whole life. And every time I was avoiding the situation I was scared of, it naturally made the circuit even stronger. I became more and more able to escape and avoid people because that's a pattern I was used to. And so I had to reprogram this new one. And part of that homework, after doing the directions, it became okay. Now do this with girls, and so that was a challenge. And then it became okay. Ask for like girls' numbers, like cold approach them. I had to practice that, and my God, was that tough. It was really hard, especially back then. But I did it, and then starting to date while being socially anxious was difficult. But I had to say after I was very dedicated. I was very focused on what I wanted. So I did try as hard, and I pushed myself even harder. So I after about 6 months of doing stuff like that, I became more confident, and I was able to actually function in group settings and in crowds. Now doesn't mean that I was still anxious and nervous. I wasn't like perfect. I was still struggling with that, but that was a step in the right direction, a step forward. And eventually, after like I'd say at the age about 21, actually, you met me like around the tail end when I was starting to get like normal ish, if you want to call it that, where I became able to actually talk to people and not be like in my head being like, this isn't interesting or this person's going to judge me for saying something stupid. Like that was difficult. So it was a lot to do with therapy in my own way of thinking and exposing myself to what I was afraid of.
Yeah, that exposure component is really, really big as well. And not a lot of people have, especially our younger listeners, will understand the struggle before the dating apps made life a lot easier of actually having to go through, like, hey, let's go to a bar and approach a random group of girls that are already in a engaged conversation, interrupt them, and find out which one is single and see if they're interested. Right? Like, there's
Yeah.
so much happening there. Man, we take it for granted that we have this application that shows us a single girl and what they're looking for and who they are right off the bat.
Hmm.
So having to go through that while dealing with your social anxiety and trying to sharpen up your social skills, and then there's other layers that get even deeper, like fear of rejection, right, and all these other
Yeah.
demons that can really, really scar you based on a bad night. And we've experienced things in the past where, like, if a night doesn't go well, like that could cripple us for many years, where we don't want to go out again. And if we do go out, we want to avoid that area at all costs to not have to revisit those people, right? So like, there's so much that happens along the way. And when we started this podcast show and we talk about, like, let's talk about better conversation and better experiences, we start by first pushing the agenda of, like, hey, it's about growing, it's about getting better, it's about like elevating and learning from each other's ideas. But that skill set and that like adding those to your arsenal also helps with the opposite, which is working through some shit that you're going through, like better conversations about it and realizing like, hey, you've gone through something similar that I have. Let's exchange notes and see how we got out of it. Or even that reassurance, like, oh, it's actually okay to feel like this right now because others have felt it as well and it's not as unusual. And then better experiences of actually doing things with others that allows you to actually work through those challenges as well. To me, I shared my story around the challenges around engagement, right? Like, and when I was engaged, it didn't work out, and I went through some challenges in my life. The first thing that I felt from an emotional standpoint many years ago when that happened was I felt like a failure. I felt like I was unable to follow through on a commitment that I was planning to make, and this vision that I had in my mind of what it could look like after getting married with this individual was very different, and it caused a lot of anxiety and breakdowns in my life because I felt like I was the only one in my circle that was dropping the ball on not being able to complete an engagement, from going from engaged to getting married. And it hurt me for a long time because I felt like I was the only one. And then something interesting started happening that I didn't realize until after I went through it, which is the fact that when someone else sees that you're experiencing something that they have in the past, they just feel like they have a deeper connection with you and they're more likely to open up about that experience because they know what you're going through and they also know how bad it hurt and how much it crippled them. And out of that feeling, they don't want anyone else to ever feel that bad feeling again. So, what started happening that was really interesting is I couldn't believe the amount of people that were opening up about things that I didn't know about them, such as failed engagements. One of them was my realtor that I had at that time, and as my realtor was driving around, he kind of knew, because I was looking for a home for me and her, and now that her was out of the picture, he knew that my circumstance has changed, and he responded back very quickly by talking about his failed marriage, not his failed engagement, but a failed marriage, and he told me that, hey, believe me when I say this, that the fact that it happened before marriage is far better because then you get crippled far like beyond that, even financially. And he opened up to me about that. And he was just my realtor. We didn't have a deeper relationship like that. And then on top of that, I had four other individuals that talked to me about challenges that they had that was very similar to mine. And at that moment, without even being strategic about it, I started noticing that the pain was starting to dissolve. Knowing that it's actually more common than you think and others are going through it, and also the fact that others came out of it and they're better because of it. Those case studies allowed me to feel like I'll be fine and it helped me work through it and also learn strategies of how they coped through it, which is why when we started off the show with better conversations, I can't even begin to express how important having better conversations is, even when it comes to self healing. We talk about the growth component being proactive, being on the offense, but I also want to talk about the defense. Defending your mental health, defending your sanity, defending your emotions from being harmed based on picking up information through better conversations. And this is why I would say I'm such a massive fan and student of all things personal development because I really believe when I said the statement many years ago, which is the fact that everything starts falling in place when you focus on working on yourself. I believe that so much because I would say from every single challenge I've ever had emotionally and mentally, whenever I felt like something was off, the instant thing I run back to is how do I keep working on myself? Because by working on myself, things just start falling in place. And it actually took me back to a really fun movie, The Wolf of Wall Street, that I was watching not too long ago. And I remember the speech that he made, and I pulled it up here because it was a really good speech where he's trying to motivate the group of individuals, and he's using the fact that they have pain points to remind them that, hey, if you have pain points, use that to fuel you. And he says, so you listen to me and you listen well. Are you behind on your credit card bills? Good. Pick up the phone and start dialing. Is your landlord ready to evict you? Good. Pick up the phone and start dialing. Does your girlfriend think you're a loser? Good. Pick up the phone and start dialing. And, his mentality was, if you're unhappy with where you are, do that thing that you know will solve it. And I can't even begin to emphasize how much personal development was for me, right? Like when I'm feeling down and off, good, work on myself and do something about it is how I saw that speech to be in my mind every single day. And I mentioned to you that, I came back from vacation 2 weeks ago and there's a lot that happened because of that. First of all, We can take the time zone into consideration. Yeah, it threw me off a little bit. It kind of messed with my sleep. We're not going to take that out of the equation, but I would say that played a small part. But then there was also the fact that there was emails and to-do lists and tasks that were building up in the back end while I was away. I strongly believe that it's easier to keep up than to catch up. And unfortunately, by going away for a full week, I felt like there was a lot of catching up to do, and it took a toll on me. Then on top of that, I gave myself a big diet and workout, and my routines came to a halt. I was pigging out, and I allowed myself to do that, knowing I would get back on track. I wasn't working out; a gym wasn't conveniently available for me, and I put a lot of things on halt. So when I came back, I felt like that momentum was kind of gone. It dissolved, and I had to build that momentum back up. And I would say that it was really yesterday that I felt like it finally took a toll on me, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I just knew that I don't care what I had piled up. I needed a me day. And a me day sometimes means unplugging and getting back on track. But to me, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, but I think the way that I decided to very quickly resolve that, being that I've experienced something like this in the past, is trying to get back into my routine as quickly as I can to give myself some level of sanity. Because when you're not following your routine anymore, you feel like everything's out of control, right? You feel like you don't have a grasp, and you feel like you're not being yourself anymore because all these things you worked on is now all over in the air. And every day is so unpredictable that you don't feel like you're grounded. So what I do right off the bat, this morning, even before our podcast recording, is I just went to the gym and came back, and I did that because I needed to remind myself that that was part of my routine. I starting to eat healthy again. I got back into that routine, not skipping this podcast show. That's important to note. I could have called you, and you know what? You being the great friend that you are, you would have let me. I would have been like, Camille, I'm feeling off today. I don't know about you, but I hope it's okay with you. But I'll take a day off, and let's come back next week. I know you, and I know how much you care about our relationship, and you would have let me do it. But I said I needed to keep a sense of routine, and because of that, I came back on it. And I can tell you already today, getting the gym out of the way, getting my usual healthy breakfast out of the way, and having this podcast episode right now, I'm already starting to feel like that great feeling that I get of achievement every single time that I'm in my rhythm. And I feel like that mojo is coming back. But to me, I strongly believe that, I think of Wolf of Wall Street. That mindset is the fact that when something is off, it's a realization that I need to do the one thing that I know that'll get me back on track. It's not picking up the phone like the movie, but rather working on myself, which made the world of a difference for me.
Hmm. I think so. Like for me, that's something that's very important for me as well. Personal development is a core value, and that's something I default to. And and I feel like a lot of people misunderstand that as anxiety, because some people feel like you're only working on yourself because you're too insecure to recognize that you're okay. You can't take a moment to rest and stop, because if you stop, that's when your anxiety comes, and that's why you distract yourself with work. But the truth is for some people that is the case. I think for you and I, for sure for you, and for sure for me actually, it's it is just something that we're driven to do, and that's how we become more of ourselves, is by working with ourselves and to become better versions of ourselves. So I think that's, like you said, it's a more grounding experience because you're reconnecting with who you are. And who you are, Mafus, is someone that works really hard on himself and wants to become the best version. So I think it's a great strategy too. I default to that as well. And what I realized too is that everyone has like their own specific needs, and when a me day, for me is different than me day for anyone else. I think, and I'm discovering more and more what a me day looks like. Kind of changes as I age, and before 5 years ago, a me day would be I do nothing, I just play video games all day. Where now I know that what actually would make me happier is doing some sort of physical activity or exploring a new one. Like that, that's the stuff I live for. And like it's very hard to find sometimes. Sometimes it's so hard to know what you want, and you have to kind of pay attention to that. And feeling like something's off is an okay feeling too, because I think we in our society too we have all these comparisons drawn about like people that work harder than us, people that achieve more than us, people that make more money than us. It's only natural that when we're not working towards something, we feel like we're stagnating, and in fact that we're a failure because there's so many comparisons of that. But what I find more and more that's helpful for me is to kind of be okay with the fact that one, I'm not them, and two, no one's gonna have like good days. I mean, we always go back to the gym analogy because I think, well, first of all, I like pretty much do nothing else besides that. Well, besides that and reading, but it's because it's a great thing to know that like some days you just feel off. You don't connect with the exercise. You don't get that same pump. You can't push as hard, and if you force yourself to do it, you just become more exhausted. So you just have to be okay with going through the motions. And sometimes it feels like you have to force yourself to do it. But just by doing that, you actually become better. And what I've noticed in my depression as well, that I have something that, well, like one of the most common things with depression is anhedonia, meaning that you don't take pleasure in doing the things that you normally do that give you pleasure. So for me, I even have to force myself to do things like play guitar, where I'm like I'm playing my favorite song and yet I feel nothing. But it isn't until I played it the third time, like okay, this is this tickles a bit, so that's a good sign, right? And sometimes it feels like you have to force yourself through that, and as long as you don't, I have a very hard time using that word force because it's not like I'm trying to say you absolutely push yourself to do it. It's more that you have to kind of be okay with being like, I don't want to do this, but I know it's good for me. So I am just going to go and do it for the sake of that. And going through the motions has such a negative connotation because it's associated with relationships, I feel. But if you do it with things you love, in those moments where you don't feel like you're having the best of days or you feel like you're having an off day, I think it could be super helpful.
Your definition of what a me day is such an important point, and I love that you even tailed it off by saying doing the things that you love, because a me day is can be defined in many ways. And I like you. When I used to do me days, it was about like, hey, let me lay in bed and watch Netflix all day and tally it up to I'm resting. But the truth is like those examples of like take a day off, what does that mean? Being that I'm going to stay in my bed and be in my PJs all day is not necessarily what rest day, a me day is really about. Like I think a me day comes down to this. When I think about traveling, which is something I did a couple weeks ago, I think a lot of people sometimes travel to escape from life, but I actually think a me day and why you travel is so that you don't let life escape you. The joys that you have of things that makes you worth living doesn't escape you. So you're allowing yourself to get away from the mundane, like, hey, I'm working a job so I don't get to live life. You're actually going out there and living life because that's the part that really matters the most. And I think a me day comes back to that is doing the things that allows you to hold on to the things that you love about life. And for you, a guitar was a great example. I think the workout is also a great example because of the fact that that is something that you may enjoy doing that's also bettering you. When I lay in bed and watch Netflix and I give myself a so-called me day, I wake up the next day feeling worse. I feel like I got nothing done. I feel like the pileup got bigger. I felt like I'm a lazy loser and I'm hard on myself because of it. But the truth is, when you start doing the things that you love on those me days, it makes a world of a difference, which is why I'm such a big fan of thinking about like what are the things that I can do that doesn't require anyone else's assistance. Like what can I do? And this could be like if there's a movie that you really, really love that maybe no one else likes or no one else is available to do it, like go and watch that movie. Like don't rely on someone else being available to do that. If you like going on a long hike and you don't have anyone to do it, go on that hike. Decide what you want to do on any given day. There is such a beauty with being happy when you're alone that I think a lot that gets highly underrated and very misunderstood. Because alone doesn't mean you're just laying around saying I'm happy being myself. It's like you can be selfish with what you want. I talked to you about this when I first moved into my Oakville condo many years ago, which was the first time I was living by myself. And when I went there, I told you about a great thing that One of our closest friends, Mike, told me the day he helped me move in. He said, "Listen, you see all this? You see the frames on the wall and the pictures that you're gonna put up? Put up what you want to. Like, if you like the nerdy superhero stuff, which I definitely like, put those up. Like, this is an opportunity for you to live the way you wanted to live, not based on the way that you were raised and what you were used to seeing. If you're used to seeing the living room is decorated in a certain way your entire life, you're very likely going to decorate it in a similar way. But what if you decide that all of a sudden you don't like black furniture anymore and you want to go minimalistic and white? What if you decide that you'd rather have everything facing the sun instead of the television set? What if you decide that you want to put up posters all over the wall where once upon a time it used to just be a clock? You can make those decisions based on what matters to you and what keeps the love of life inside of you. And I think it's worth thinking about that from a me day standpoint, is doing the things that you want to do that because it makes you happy and for no other reason, and not by what you were conditioned to do along the way. The other part that I really like that you brought up was the comparison aspect, which I think plays a very heavy role in why our generation is having a lot more newer mental health challenges than we've ever seen, or if not newer, at least in a larger extreme, which is the element of being able to compare in ways that we've never been able to compare before. I want to start by talking about a quick suggestion here, which is you can control the noise in many ways without understanding how much of a control you have. I think it's very, very much misunderstood. For example, when you open up your social media account, if I open up Instagram right now, it can get quite overwhelming if I'm following 5,000 people. It's kind of like the equivalent of having 5,000 people in your room talking to you at the same time. If that doesn't cause anxiety, the thought of that is causing me anxiety. So I don't know what else would. But the realization that your social media is more like a radio dial. It's not about you turn it on and there is noise. If you open up Instagram and you weren't following a single person, you just have an empty space. The social media is just only as loud as you make it. So it's up to you to decide how loud you want to make it based on the amount of people you want to follow. And if all of a sudden you're feeling like you get overwhelmed, it's a good indicator that you can bring that number down. So first, the volume of the noise, but then secondly, the content that you're consuming. You can also decide who you're following. Are you following people for motivation, entertainment, or knowledge and experience that you can learn from, or are you following them because you want to see what their life is doing and feel bad about your own? And completely ignoring the fact that what you're seeing on social media is not even the authentic life, but rather the filtered, edited, selective photos, highlight reel that is going to make you feel bad about yours. And I think about the fact that we spend a lot of time measuring the distance between ourselves and the other person rather than looking backwards and measuring the distance that we've walked ourselves. Because when you start looking at the measurement of what you walked yourself, you really start to appreciate the fact that you've grown without the unknown story of why the other person is further ahead. Like, you don't know. You don't know if they got a handout and they got a leg up. You don't know if someone fueled and fed them money. You don't even know if the life that they're living is real. It might have been one vacation, they did a photo shoot, and now they look like they live in an island. Like, you just don't know. So the fact that we're comparing with the unknown will never give us the level of happiness that we want. And yet, the only story you really know to its full detail is your own story. So why not compare with how far you've come instead? To your gym analogy, I go to the gym and I have off days. But what I also think about is not the fact that the guy beside me is crushing it on the bench press. I think about the fact that, last year I only went to the gym like 3 times. And this week I've been here 4 times. So my worst workout is better than my prime last year. And when I realize that, I go home a lot more content knowing that even if I had a failure day at the gym, it's still a winning day overall in the bottom line. And that to me makes me a lot more motivated to stay focused on the prize here.
Yeah, I think about it too. It's like we're so focused on the outcome nowadays. It's just we stop thinking about the present moment and the next step. Sometimes I feel like when you don't even make a comparison with with another person, and sometimes you make a comparison with yourself. Be, it's good to compare backwards because you can see the progress. But sometimes, like, I feel like I get stuck with comparing myself in the future of who I want to be, and it's almost like I'm betraying the ideal self by being in the present and giving in to those desires that won't push me forward there. And it was something I struggled with a lot. because like naturally I want to be the best version of myself, but I have to recognize that like I'm not perfect and I do have these like wants, and sometimes I will waste time watching YouTube videos that make me laugh, or sometimes I will scroll through Instagram mindlessly and not realize that hey, like this isn't helping me. But like that's okay. It's the same way with like having off days. I feel it's, you want everything to work all the time, but sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay. Your energy can be off, and I become when I become paralyzed with the fear that I'm not achieving what I can achieve, and that's betraying my future self. What I find really helps is to just focus on the next step. So if my future self wants to become more knowledgeable and more relatable, and I just think about, okay, how do I do that? How do I become this amazing communicator, this person with that knows what to say and has all the right words, and has these kind of insights that really relate to people, that people can really take away. I fantasize about that, and what I've learned actually is that fantasizing about the person you can be, or if a situation in the past, how different you would have been if a situation played out differently in the past, actually wastes your brain energy, right? If you look at it in an energy context, what am I doing that, like, what is the cost of what I'm doing? There's always going to be a cost. And some of it is just energy if you're just stuck in your head and wasting time. Sure, you can argue different things, but for me in general, I'm going to stick with this analogy of energy, because the whole point is that in our modern day society, people that play video games tend to have a worse executive function, meaning that they're not able to take like an abstract big thing and break it down into smaller steps, because there's a huge thing. You can't just say create a resume and people know what that means. In the same way that you can't tell like a 2-year old clean your room and they'll know what that means. You actually have to like you break it down the individual steps. And so when I'm stuck, I hate doing this exercise, but it's so helpful. It's what do I want? I have that. It's a big thing, and then I pinpoint. I write down exactly what I have to do. So if it's writing a resume, it won't be something as simple as update your resume. It'll be detailed to be like open up the file on your computer, type, type your experience, your work experience, add the years now, add this statement, update your email if you changed it, all these different things. Like actually break down the micro, and then that way you can focus on the next step. And that way I'm not caught up with that, because when when I use all my energy on fantasizing about the person who I could be or the person who I could have been, then I don't have that energy available for me for other things, because it is using the problem solving aspect of your brain. And you have to be really respectful of that, respectful of yourself, that you aren't this person with infinite energy. You do have a finite amount of resources and finite amount of time, and you have to be able to respect both. So naturally what I find is that being okay with the off days kind of translates to that too. I used my energy, and yet I'm still maintaining this habit, and this routine, because it's important to me. And it might not be ideal, but in the same way, it is still moving me forward, even if I don't do it perfectly. I think that it was such a hard thing to program, especially for an anxious mind like myself, that it's highly neurotic, where I always focused on, if I do this or if I say this, this will happen. It was always focused on that, as opposed to let me just be present in this present moment, to focus on what I can do now, what I can control, because really I can't control what the other person feels. I can't control how I feel. I can control how I react and how I can move forward beyond that. Once I reframed myself from thinking about the outcome to focusing on the next step, that's where I saw the progress like shift to be more consistent.
The idea around um finite energy is such an important one, and I loved your explanation of how to deal with the anxiousness of the future, because while you were bringing that up, I was like, damn, I do that a lot, and I was like, I actually don't even know how I deal with that. So I was very, very curious to how you kind of deal with the fact that you're like, I'm trying to be this person and I'm not doing enough. And sometimes the I'm not doing enough part is what brings in tons of anxiety and anxiousness. And that's kind of like my mindset around sometimes the anxiety I get around giving myself a me day. Knowing that there's so much that needs to get done and I'm not doing it and I'm allowing myself to be okay with it. Like that's sometimes hard to really disconnect from. How do you, it's kind of like I told you, like we went on vacation just before our book launch day. It's like, how do I not think about the book launch while I'm there? But yet I was able to. And I thought that was really, really interesting once you get to that level of thinking. And so what you said about finite, it's such a big piece, from a very basic surface level. We all know, every single human being knows that you can only run so fast and you can only run so long, right? And at that moment, you need to slow down, and you know that your body will only let you do so much. So if you just from a surface level know that, you only know that you can only cover so much ground in one day, at least on foot, right? And then when you think about that from a mental state, it's the same idea. It's like, if you only know you can get this much done in a day, do you actually know whether you're overextending the track? Are you actually giving yourself too much expectation based on the amount that you're about to do with the fuel that you have every single day? And it's also worth noting that everyone, like physical energy, everyone also has different mental energies, right? And if someone like myself has very low mental energy, I was actually on a date night just 2 nights ago, and my girlfriend literally saw the instant that I went from hyper talking to like dead, like gone, like completely checked out. And she even said, like, what's wrong? What just happened? And I was like, honestly, nothing. I'm just exhausted. And I just realized it. My energy level goes off in a split second. So with that realization that you've highlighted so well, Camille, it also gives me the understanding that I give myself a to-do list of things that I want to get done each day. But I know that sometimes I don't know if it's possible to get all these 25 items done in a day. So if I only get 8 of them done, I'm not hard on myself. I just know that I wasn't ready to be able to do all 25 in a day. So I take the rest and shift it to the next day. As I say to my girlfriend, I chip away at my to-do list. And I think the chip away part gets highly underrated, because a lot of people, they see a successful day as, did I get everything on my plate done or not? If I didn't, it was a bad day. But the truth is, do you actually know if you overfilled that plate? Do you actually know if you overfilled that? Like, do you actually know the amount of time, and can you bring it down to a science and say, this is how much energy and this is how much time I had? And not to mention, not ignoring that there's interruptions along the way. Even something as small as needing to go to the bathroom takes away time out of your day. Like, do you take that into consideration? So by doing that, I've, part of the approach that I took when I released the journal actually had a lot to do with this mindset, which is start of the day by giving yourself the right way of thinking, which is first and foremost taking a moment to think about, how do I feel? And it was because of the journal yesterday I realized that I actually was feeling off, because I gauged it in the morning and I was like, you know what? I don't feel great today. I'm not sure why. But then following it up by saying, what am I grateful for? Right? Actually giving yourself an opportunity every single day to remind you that there are things that are working out in your favor. Because if you lose sight of that and you only focus on the to-do list, you're going to have this never-ending feeling of like, I'm not achieving anything and nothing is moving, and it becomes a very hectic life. So taking a moment to actually look back and say, what am I grateful for? And then asking yourself, what can I do to make the day better? And I really like that, because that's when you start thinking about the to-do list that you set out for the day. And I actually had a realization only when I started writing down what I need to get done today, that when I go on autopilot, I actually almost get nothing done, maybe one or two things, because I'm trusting my memory. I'm saying, oh, I got to get my car oil change done, and I got to go and make it this phone call. But I forget the 20 other micro things that I should have had done. So by not being able to think about that, that is what gives me anxiety, is going to bed at night and saying, crap, I forgot these 18 other things that I didn't even think about because I was too focused on that. So being a little bit more specific on what you need to get that done that day, doing the best that you can with your finite energy, and knowing that it's not about getting the to-do list done. It's about just getting things done based on the promise that you made for the day, and then chipping away at that to-do list one at a time. It actually brought me back to a book that I was reading not too long ago called The One Thing. The subtitle is The Surprisingly Simple Truth About Extraordinary Results, and it's a book by Gary Keller. And Gary Keller talks about thinking about what you want to achieve 5 years from now first. Okay, so like think about who you want to be 5 years from now. But then what Gary talks about that not a lot of us think about is working backwards from that 5 year goal. First putting that 5 years up and then asking yourself, what do I need to do every year that will allow me to achieve that 5 year goal? And you kind of start thinking about like, okay, so if I need to get to my 5 year goal of, let's use fitness as our ongoing analogy here. If I need to get to this weight, I need to lose this much weight every single year. But then Gary says, okay, so then break it up and ask yourself, what do I need to achieve every month to achieve that 1 year goal? And then what do I need to do every week to achieve that 1 month goal? What do I need to do every day to achieve that 1 week goal? And what do I need to do every hour to achieve that 1 day goal? And what happens that is actually quite interesting when you do the activity in full detail is you realize that you actually don't need to do as much as you need to get to that 5 year goal, right? Because when we don't have that metric or goal in mind, we're kind of putting all in, 24 hours a day. If you're sleeping 8, maybe 16 hours a day, you're burning out and you're not sure if you're getting to their goal. But what if that goal told you that you didn't need to put 16, but you only needed to put 3? Right? And that would allow you to get your day goal, your week goal, your month goal. What if you took a me day and it doesn't set you off track because you can make up for that the next day because you have a lot more capacity than you thought? Do we actually know that? And I think that book, which I'm going to read out one more time for those that are interested, The One Thing by Gary Keller, is a fantastic way to think about it because what he helped me realize is that I'm actually putting in more time than I need to get to that goal that I have. See, the realization, Camille, is it's not about moving fast, it's about moving correctly. And the idea about moving correctly is knowing that if something took 5 years to get there, are you doing the necessary steps to get to that 5 year goal? Not how fast can I bring that 5 year down to 3? The time wasted is when you're not spending it doing the correct things rather than are you spending enough time there. That was a big shift that I had to do over the last few years. But I have to say that realization made me far more patient than it's ever had.
Yeah, I mean, that is, well, what I was talking about too was when I get stuck in that trap of fantasizing about who I can become. What you're saying is completely different. I just want to point it out for listeners as well that you're actually problem solving with practical solutions to reach that goal, as opposed to fantasizing about, being very vague and unspecific and kind of not being realistic to the actions required to get there. You just kind of magically expect it to happen without the work being done. So I'm glad that you brought up that point, and that's a very good way to look at it too. Is you can't really rush the process. You kind of have to trust yourself that it is going to happen. You just need to have a goal and a plan in mind to achieve that. I think, in the spirit of mental health as well, when you hyper focus on that, you can have that issue of the anxiety and that you're betraying yourself for not doing it. But that's why I brought it back to focus on just the next step, as you pointed out with that. And we're naturally inclined to just constantly think about the future because that's the way we survived. Is we had to think about our predators and stuff when we were evolving, and food, water, all that kind of stuff. We always had to think about the future, so that's a very natural thing. It takes a very specific skill that you have to develop to be focused on the present. And when you bring it to that, that's when you can like focus. The problem I find for me is that, and I think for most people in general, and meditation really helped in that aspect where you can achieve what you want to achieve. It's just the problem is the mind goes to several different places all at once. Motivation and focus and actually diligent work comes from having your mind fixated on one thing and focus. So if you can practice actually holding that attention to that one thing and whatever you pay attention to grows, then you're naturally going to get closer to your goal. But it's about learning how to get that focus. And I think, unfortunately, it's very easy now to, well, I should say, it's easy to develop the bad habit where you're multitasking. In fact, people celebrate multitasking like it's a good thing, but people don't see the negative sides to it, which is that it's very hard for people to concentrate. A lot of people now, when they're watching movies, they'll have their phone out. They can't concentrate even on the movie they're watching. They have to do something else. Or we have dual monitors. There's a lot of gamers that will be, playing a video game and then watching a YouTube video or watching a movie while they're playing the video game, and then listening to music, and then having their phone out. It's what are you doing there? You're training your mind not to be able to focus, and that's something you have to develop these good habits for. And when you have your mind like scattered all about, it's no wonder why you're anxious and you're tired all the time, because you have all this different stimuli going in your brain, and none of it is productive because you're not actually doing something diligently and forthrightly. You're not focused in what you do. And attention is something that's trained as well. And if you don't have the discipline to focus, it's very difficult to achieve what you want. And what I find too is meditation is really what helped. Well, exercise as well, because you really have to focus. And well, like military really did help with that as well. It's just building that discipline to be able to focus on that one thing and be single-minded about what you want to achieve. If you break it down to smaller steps and be like, this is what I have to do, then, and you make it more specific as well, and for some people, and maybe for most people actually, if you can create like a routine that is very structured, and almost you can write down like how you manage your time and focus on the things you want to focus on without forcing yourself to be enslaved by that idea, then I think that's where you get like the best results. And it's it's so hard to actually put in practice, and especially when you're having those off days as well. It may seem like nothing's working, and you can't concentrate. You can't put your mind on one thing. So you have to be able to like somehow manage to practice that even while being off if you can. And that's not to say that you can't take rest day. And sometimes rest is actually conducive to growth. It's just that being able to realize that there are multi things to the mind. Like you have to be able to train creativity as well to have that outlet. That intellectual cognitive outlet, that emotional piece, the social piece, the physical piece. They're all very important sections. As soon as you neglect one, then you'll start to suffer if you neglect it long enough. And it's very hard to recognize what's important if you haven't done it before. So for a lot of people that haven't exercised, they don't realize what they're missing out on because they never had it. So it's important to recognize what will fuel your mind, like how you can optimize the best performance. And a lot of people like myself are interested in biohacking. So I have little tools here and there as well. That I have a UV light screen that shines 10,000 lux into my eyes when I press it, and I do that for about 20 minutes every morning, like not directly into my eyes, but in my periphery, just because that will promote that sense of waking up and alertness, and also programs my circadian rhythm, which is this clock that we have internally to function with hormones in the optimal way that prepares me for the day. So a lot of it is preparation, and a lot of it is experimentation within yourself. You have to kind of be open with to that in order to kind of move past it. With mental health in general, there are so many different pieces that I feel are kind of neglected because we're just taught as you're depressed. So either the old school way, which is just deal with it, ignore it, but now it's become too hyper focused on, yeah, you're depressed and there's something wrong with you. You should take medication, and it becomes almost normalized, this pathology, where really sometimes it's not clinical depression. It can just be this kind of depression that means that you're missing something. Like you have to pay attention to that instead of dismissing that as, oh, this is my brain all messed up, so I need medical intervention. Sometimes of course, see a psychiatrist, see someone that is a professional to diagnose it, but also be curious about that. Like, what exactly is going on here? Why are you feeling this way? Because it's something that we constantly struggle with now because of the fact that we're bombarded by all this different stimuli, and we have to have our phone on us at all times. That we just distract ourselves when there's negative emotion.
It comes back to our understanding of us being unique beings as well, right? Because it's like even the advice that I'm giving, I know that sometimes when I talk about writing things down and using that as like your strategy and structure, it's like that's still a new habit, right? Like that's still something that someone that didn't do in the past needs to add. And in some ways, if it's not managed, it could cause more anxiety than less because now you have this one other thing that you need to do every single day. I think when you and I were talking about tracking our time as an experiment, I think you mentioned that as well. Like adding that extra thing wasn't a good thing for you. So it's really about paying attention to what works for you, which I think is an important thing because the beautiful thing about your body and your mind is that it's going to point out the fact that something's off, right? And sometimes you feel that, but you're not necessarily spending enough time to reflect and figure out why you feel. So it's pay attention to those. I spent a lot of time yesterday on my off day asking myself that, like, what happened? Like, why exactly do I feel that? And even though I feel like by the end of it, I may not have answered it, I have a much better understanding. And more importantly, because I paid attention to how I was feeling, I noticed when I got better. I noticed that something was working and there was progress happening. So by paying attention is sometimes the first step, and then slowly start implementing different ways that you can make that work. Once you start figuring out where the pain points are, there's a lot more that you could do with it along the way. I love your emphasis around the focus and where multitasking could cause a lot of challenges down the road. There's a study that was done around a well-known phrase called context switching, and I didn't know what context switching was until I started working with my team of developers at my agency, where one of them brought this up to my attention because what happens in our open space sometimes is that people will just naturally walk up to the developer and saying, "Hey, I got a quick question for you," da 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 da, and then it seems like such a small thing that took 10 seconds, but context switching is about the other 20 minutes that it takes for you to mentally come back on track from where you were distracted. And it's actually 20 minutes. That's what was figured out in a study, that when you get distracted and your mind gets disconnected from something, it takes about 20 minutes for you to be fully engaged on that thing that you were working on or the thing that you were doing. So you imagine a TV show. You look down at your phone, you're distracted, you respond to a text, you look up. Even though you're kind of paying attention to it from a physical standpoint, you're mentally not engaged with that for another 20 minutes. And usually the episodes are not long enough for you to be able to engage with it. So you lost the essence of what that episode was meant to do. So in anything that you do, it's important to have that focus and realize that the context switching by being distracted is actually going to throw you off guard and cause anxiety as a result of you not being able to get it done on time, which is why it's worth thinking about having a laser focus on the things that you want to do. But then there's also the other side of it too, that I think that's important to note, which is when you start getting these items done one at a time, you need to be selfish with your priorities. And this is something that took me a while to do. When someone needed something and they would ask me to help them with something, I know that even though it was their priority, I feel like I feel guilty for not helping them if I say no. I feel guilty for not helping them get their thing off the checklist because I was the reason why that stopped. But I'm okay with that, and I'm at peace with that if I know that by doing that thing to help the other person actually throws me off my priorities. The other day, I actually said no to a paid speaking event. This was last week. I said no to a paid speaking event, and that felt really good, Camille, because saying no to paid speaking events highlighted a couple things. Number one, it highlighted the fact that it didn't align with my priorities for that month. In fact, there was too much going on in that week that even though there was money involved, it didn't make sense for me to squeeze that in there because I was betraying my energy level that I believed in. The second thing, as you highlighted, is the fact that there's many other priorities that are important outside of the financial standpoint. And if money was my only driver, my only priority, I would have said yes, and I would have figured it out, and I would probably have sacrificed something that wasn't earning me money, even though it was technically good for me. But by knowing that there's other parts of me that's equally as important, such as my relationship, such as my mental health, I was able to look at it and saying, like, you know what, adding more financial substance to this week actually does not make sense. And it felt so empowering to be able to say no, because it was at that moment that I really had the reassurance that I wasn't letting money be the only driver of my decisions day to day. There was other things that were driving it along the way. I love that you're also getting into the practical standpoint, and I think this is the best way to spend the rest of our time is some of the practical practices that we have that allows us to help with our mental health. And you mentioned meditation, which is really important. I also mentioned briefly journaling, which I think is very important as well. I'm also a really big fan of meditation, and I think over the show of Modern Mindset, we talked about meditation a couple of times, but as small examples. I really want to spend this one being the one that we go deep on meditation, because I think it is one of the biggest additions that has really allowed me to get a good grasp of my mental health and really allow me to be more in control of being in the present. So I'd love to talk a little bit about meditation, if that's okay, Camille. I'd love to get hear a little bit about your experience, maybe the origin story of how you came across meditation the first time. Were you a believer? Were you sold on it right away? Because some people sometimes hesitate to get into meditation. Some people, for some reason, doesn't believe in the benefits of it. But what was that experience like for you, and what are your practices like now?
Oh, right. So I think like around 6 years ago or seven, my therapist did do like kind of it wasn't exactly yoga nidra, but it was kind of like a body scan like of muscle tension. And so I really couldn't do it. It wasn't for me, and that was my first experience. I didn't really notice any benefits. But then in med school, I had a lot of problem. Like I had a very hard time sleeping. I was constantly anxious, constantly thinking about the next test, what I studied throughout the day, and I didn't know how to stop it. And the more I became interested in holistic approach to medicine in general and to the patient, meditation constantly came up in these studies and constantly was recognized as something that benefits pretty much every faculty and actually trains different neurons in your brain to fire differently and to actually strengthen the brain areas associated with attention with inhibition of pleasures and impulses. So I became very interested in that way, and so I used it as a way to sleep. And naturally, I downloaded an app, and that's what I used. And I've been using that to fall asleep every night for the past 6 years. So it naturally came about that way. When when I was suffering through the panic attacks, I was taught to focus on my breathing, and at the time I didn't realize that that was meditation, but it is as well. Another problem I kind of see, which I actually didn't know, but mindfulness is presented as meditation, and like a lot of people think that's the only way to meditate, but there are so many different versions of it that it's amazing. And I'm looking into different ways. So yoga nidra is an example where you focus on contracting like little muscles and uh, and then releasing and then contracting more and then releasing and then you focus on adding more parts and then eventually just doing this whole contraction. You focus on the relief of tension, and then that's how you achieve this kind of a sense of meditation. And I think um, I forget. I think the Sanskrit word is dwan, which is that attention you have, the focus attention, to get to samdhi, which is that temporary state of alignment where you kind of become separate from your thoughts. And I think that's the goal that I'm learning about how to achieve more and more. Because to be honest, I've never achieved that separation from my actual thoughts in the way that I can actually observe them as an outsider and have no control over them. I mean, it was almost like watching a movie, and I've only had that maybe 3 times in my life throughout my whole 6 years of meditation. And what I find more and more is because I'm not focused on retrieving that. Where now I'm learning these other techniques to see what works for me, and there are so many of them that I really enjoy chanting. So using the like chant, that is very helpful for me. And like I forget also the name of the other one, but there's one where you put your thumbs into your ears to block them, and then you kind of buzz like a bee, and you make these vibrations so you could feel it in the front of your face. And that one I found very effective to just completely like shut off my mind, and very relaxing too. And you can combine that with closing the nine gates, where you put like your fingers in certain points, um, and and I forget exactly how to do it off the top of my head. I had to actually look up that. I've just been experimenting with all these different techniques, seeing what works for me, and it's super interesting. And I want to point out to people as well, these are techniques that have been known for over 3,000 years, and science just recently started validating them. There was a study that came out just like last year, and I think if you read if you read the book by James Nestor, I can't remember what the title is. The title escapes me, but James Nestor talks about how important nasal breathing is. There's a technique called Nadashuti where you block out one nostril and breathe through the other. And they actually did a scientific study, actually two of them that I've read, where they have the patients do that practice, and they'll have one group to close out the right nostril and the other group to close out the left nostril. And there are actually changes in heart rate, blood pressure, and general like emotions. And that's because when you breathe through one nostril, it activates the opposite side of the brain. It also triggers like the this kind of the fight or flight or the rest and digest system. So it can actually influence how you feel in real time in the moment, and actually activate these pathways in the body. And this has been known for 3,000 years. It's just now it's getting more and more accepted and researched in the scientific community. So it was very easy for Western medicine to deny it, but now that we're seeing the benefits, it really reinforces the fact that it works. And that's what got me more and more interested in digging into more detail and in different techniques. So it's hard for me to say which one I'm currently doing, because I spent about 20 minutes a day looking at new ones. And honestly, there's so many that I can't even I don't even remember the names of most of them, and especially because it's a different language. A lot of the names, it's hard for me to remember. Um, I find it super interesting that mindfulness has been taught as that's the way to meditate, but actually the goal of meditation is to be mindless, to separate yourself from your mind, from your thoughts. That's a definition of meditation. Well, that's the goal of meditation. So it's almost kind of counterintuitive if you think about it. To be mindful, to be present in the moment, is actually to be mindless, and that's what I find super interesting, because when you start being able to detach yourself from your thoughts and your emotions, then you can actually listen to who you are and become a better version of yourself, and be okay with the fact that you can't control how other people feel, or you can't control these certain outcomes, and it's okay. It's it's honestly such a beautiful thing to research about and to learn how to do, and I'm still in my infancy of learning it. But I know that you've been meditating for quite a while too, so I'm curious to hear how what your experience is like.
There's a study done by a well-known author and researcher, Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he talks about the transition and steps that are required to have that release from your thoughts. And it's interesting that you pointed out how like being mindful is almost contradictory. But I think it was Joe Dispenza that first made me realize that the part about being mindful is actually just the first step, is to actually be very intentional and receptive of what your body and your mind is telling you, and then having that separation piece. And he actually has a really interesting practice that that might be worth trying out for you, Camille, if you're trying to get more of that feeling of that separation from thoughts. That I actually found that to be one of the most effective, which is he talks about the idea of sitting still and feeling like there's water rising from the ground, and it's slowly elevating to a point where the room where it finishes up with the entire room being filled up with water. Because what happens is you start feeling a certain aura around you on the external, almost like you had this like external shell, like an eggshell around you. And when you start feeling the buildup of that, and you start paying attention to things that are actually not your own skin, like you're trying to feel feelings that are a little bit further away from your body, you actually start using that as your separator, which I thought to be very, very effective. But your point about like so many different ways to meditate is something that took me a while to understand, because first and foremost, I got into meditation because of the fact that there's a lot of people that I look up to in different industries that have constantly been highlighting meditation as one of their practices. And this is thanks to the fact that one of the other practices that I do, which is listening to audiobooks every day, it also allows me to not only better my mental health, but it allows me to learn new things that I bring back into conversations like this one, like I just did with Joe Dispenza. That came out of an audiobook. And the fact that I keep hearing about meditation over and over again, it finally made me want to look more into it. And I have to tell you, at the very beginning, when I started going around and asking other people in the world of meditation how to meditate, because I was trying to learn the basics, I started getting the same answer, which used to frustrate me at the beginning. They would always say, there is no wrong way to meditate. And I was like, okay, that's awesome, but I really want to learn how to do it. Like, what do I need to do? They're like, there's no wrong way. And it frustrated me. But I realized down the road, what you're saying is so true, which is the fact that there are so many ways that someone actually shouldn't be telling you how to meditate. They should be showing you what these options are, where you experiment with them and figure out which one is best fitting for you. For example, in the Muslim religion, praying 5 times a day is a form of meditation. Standing silently in a quiet room, facing a certain direction, and having a laser focus on not only mindfulness, but also the focus of being in the present and connecting with the higher power is a big part of that meditation process for many people as well. So it was that realization that that was the case. But for those of you that are like me, that maybe was trying to figure out where do I start and not sure how to first get a taste of meditation, I encourage you to actually use one of our best sources out there, which is YouTube. Because what you could do by YouTube is you could search guided meditation, and you'll find guided meditation that's as short as 3 minutes and as long as 1 hour, maybe even longer, and work your way up. At first, the idea of sitting in silence for an hour seemed daunting to me. Like, I was like, how on earth is anyone going to sit in silence for an hour? Where we know some of the best in the world sometimes do it from anywhere from 5 to 8 hours, which is mind boggling. But I realized that once I got through 3 minutes, and then I did 5 minute guided meditations, then I did 10 minutes. At about the 10-minute mark, I started realizing the three was not long enough for me. I actually started staying away from the three because it felt too quick. Then I moved up to 15. Then I moved up to 20. By the time I got to 20 minutes, 10 minutes felt too short. Then I got to 30. Then I did 1 hour. And now I can't do anything less than 30 minutes. And I feel like it's just not valuable enough. And I learned that it's usually in that first 5 to 10 minutes that you're kind of going through this battle of trying to get your mind into the present. You're trying to block out all that noise and all the thoughts that you came in with before you started the meditation. So I find that that 5 to 10 minutes wasn't very effective for me personally. But then after a while, I got really good at using that first 5 to 10 minutes to get my mind balanced and then have a laser focus on the meditation and then have mindfulness and then suddenly have that separation of thoughts, which I can't say I achieve every time, but it definitely does help in many, many ways. I think that reoccurring practice started making me realize that there was a lot of benefits that I didn't see from day one. Priya and I, who are in this golden love of personal development, are constantly trying to teach each other new things that we could try. Her and I started doing meditation together, and we would always exchange notes, and we would actually pass on links and be like, hey, try this one today, and hey, try that one today, or try this method today, or hey, this is what happened in my experience. And having someone to talk to about it really helped, where I started seeing that, hey, things that she's doing are interesting for me to try as well. And it's only when I started trying to do that that it changed everything for me. I was reading President Obama's bio, and in his biography, he talked about how no matter what was happening in his life as a president, every morning he would wake up and he would make sure that before he got his day started, there was two things that was an absolute necessity. First was the shave and shower combo. He said no matter what, he needed to start his day by shaving and showering. But before he even did that, the first thing he would do when he wakes up in the morning is he would get on a treadmill and just walk for 30 minutes uninterrupted. It didn't matter what crisis was happening. And keep in mind, like, Obama lived through the 9/11 era, right? Like, he was a president during that. And even then, he would start his day off by walking on a treadmill and being in the present and really getting his thoughts together. And then only after he's done with the shave and shower practice that he then gets briefed on what his day looks like. And I thought someone from that position of being the president of the country that still made getting his mental health together, getting his thoughts together first thing in the morning before attending to any crisis was quite a fascinating thing for me. And it made me think a lot about how I can do that every day as well. So, no matter how busy my day is, no matter how much is on my plate, no matter how many challenges I have to deal with from maybe the night before, by spending the day allowing myself to just focus on me first and focus on getting that separation of thoughts and saying, you know what, I can deal with today. Like, no matter what, this isn't as big of an issue as I thought. Or, you know what, I'll be able to deal with this to the best that I can, and I'm okay with that. It gives you that level of peace and healing that's sometimes hard to do when you think you are your thoughts. You know, when you feel down and you're saying, okay, I'm a sad person, or I'm depressed, or I'm an angry person, attaching that with what we talked a lot about in the last episode around identity, it starts becoming very difficult to separate and eliminate that part of you because you make it seem like you're living a bad life and you're unhappy and there's no way out of it, rather than the fact that you're observing that these are what you're feeling at the moment and you can deal with this and get through it. I think that realization made a huge deal for me. I have to add on that journaling became the next best thing because usually what comes out of that meditation when I come back, when I finish my meditation practice, immediately journaling right after actually allows me to think about the world in a different perspective than it would have if I jumped for the journal right off the bat.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that people have talked about shower thoughts like all the time, and it's like, there's all these tweets and whatever, and like it becomes a thing. But really, if you think about it, it's almost in the same way of meditation because when you're taking a shower, you are being mindless, and yet these new creative thoughts come out of seemingly nowhere. That's the same with meditation. I find that like it really does allow you to connect with yourself on a level that optimizes how you think and how you feel in the way that you want, that is conducive to your personal journey and your growth. Just to give some scientific like validity to what Obama did with the 30 minutes on the treadmill, it's actually been shown that if you in the morning do a forward kind of motion, so that like you walk and you walk forward, it actually does reduce your level of anxiety throughout the whole day, and it actually increased your level of alertness, which is kind of counterintuitive because anxiety seems like a hypervigilant state which is associated with alertness, but at the same time you have this very synergistic kind of effect where you lower your anxiety so you can actually focus and you increase your ability to focus just by having that walk in the morning when you get up. And of course, I don't remember the specific numbers, but of course 10 minutes is good enough. 15 I think is optimal, and anything beyond that is better. But you can start at anything like that. And also meditation, the transformative part of meditation, where people become these new people, and they become more connected with themselves and just more at peace with who they are. That transformative part of meditation comes when you do meditation at least 5 days a week. For the number in the study was 17 minutes. So if you aim for 20, it's probably a good number. And if you do it for a number of months, then you can actually see permanent changes in your personality that will affect how you perform and how you can focus and where you can put your focus too. So it is kind of important to notice that, one, this is not just something you can put down. I mean, you can, don't get me wrong, but the benefits come through these repeated exposures and making it a lifestyle. And once you start doing it, like you said, it just becomes easier. This is a skill. We're taught all the time to think in the future. It's very hard to actually bring ourselves to this moment. That takes a lot of patience and practice. And in our society, it's almost kind of counterintuitive because we're always like on our phones, on our emails, we're always bombarded by all this different stimuli and thinking about the next step in the future and not focusing on what we're doing now, which oftentimes can be the next step, but not focusing on the outcome instead. And that's the goal of meditation. Is I find too that this, to get the separation, that relaxation actually allows me to like approach whatever task I'm going through and to become more creative as well, but approach that task with a level of alertness that isn't hyper stimulating. It's almost like having a cup of coffee but without all the jitterness. And I think for a lot of people, once they start implementing that and sticking with it, it is a hugely powerful experience. For me, I I've been making it my goal to become more peaceful with myself, because with anxiety it feels like there's this war within my head that that I'm anxious about the future. But at the same time, then it's like, stop being anxious about the future. You're being silly. And then I've used to fight my mind almost every day on little things. But as soon as I started taking a step back and just realizing that these are just my thoughts and they aren't me, and whatever the outcome is going to be okay. So the best thing I've implemented in my life is, as soon as I have those anxious thoughts, I know you're going to look like an idiot, or you said something wrong here. So people are going to judge you and think that you're not that knowledgeable anyway. And people like, what kind of value do you have to offer? So be it. If I have none, whatever. I'm still trying. And just to be able to walk away from that is enough to make me at peace with myself. And what I find too is having a goal that isn't about chasing happiness, but chasing that peace. Naturally, happiness comes as a byproduct. So when happiness comes, I can really appreciate it because I'm at peace, and I can live in that present moment instead of. I used to have the problem where I think a lot of people can relate as well, is once I have happiness, then I'm like, oh crap, this is not going to last long, so I better enjoy it while I have it. And then it becomes, oh my god, when is it going to stop? When I'm going to stop being happy? So then naturally, it goes away because I'm trying to force it to stay. But being able to let go of that is super powerful, and I attribute that to meditation.
I don't think happiness and peace can exist without one or the other, and I even think like that feeling of, oh my god, this isn't going to last, what do I do? I don't even think that's ultimate happiness. I think that's the momentary feeling that you get of an achievement, or like you're celebrating the moment that you're having rather than the endless happiness that comes together. So it almost needs like its own different word and definition. But I think peace and happiness, it's very much the same thing, which I never believe in the idea of chasing happiness. I don't think it's something that's supposed to be chasing. It's not running away from you. It's always been around. I believe you're activating happiness, not chasing it. And I think by activating it is that realization that it was always inside of you. By you being able to bring that out, along with peace, it gives you the opportunity to be that person every day, and not letting external or circumstances take that and rob you away from it. Because if they have, you haven't really activated it. You were just bringing it out for the momentary run, which makes a world of a difference. I'm going to go back to what I said just a moment ago, which is the importance of being selfish with your priority, making sure that you checkmark the things that allows you to have the best day, and really have control over your mental health. Because what you said was very important, which is we're letting the busyness of the world allow us to neglect things like meditation, right? We're letting our to-do list, our tasks, our cell phone, our distractions, thoughts in our head from the day before, the things that needs to get done after the weekend. We're letting those things stop us from meditating because we think by sacrificing meditation is going to give us more time to do the other things. But if you're not in the right headspace, the time that you spend on that extra thing is not going to give you the longevity that you want. You're gonna find that it may help you in the short term, but down the road, you're experiencing things like more anxiety, burnout, depression, and other feelings that come with the fact that you don't have a good grasp of your mental health, and the fact that you're not in the right headspace to be doing the things that you're doing. This is why I made it such a big important part of my life, and a big priority, that it doesn't matter how big something else gets. I don't let the illusion of a task being so large make it feel like it's more important than taking care of my mental health. And when I had that realization, I started making sure that I stack them. I make sure that my day starts with meditation first, and then I tackle on these things, and don't let the fact that they're they're a bigger task, make it feel like it's more inflated. It's really not. It's just one other item on your list. It just may take more time to tackle it down. And what you said was fantastic, and a big part that I actually forgot, which is the idea that there are proven studies and research, and actually more research than ever, that really justifies the benefit for this. So this isn't even me coming back with saying I have a hunch it's going to help you. There's genuine proof that it's going to help you, and the fact that you can go in at the very beginning of your meditation journey with thoughts that maybe you're not happy about and come out on the other side saying, I've been able to not only eliminate them, I've been able to rewire my entire way of thinking and my perspective and essentially become a different person. Is it not worth entertaining if you have something in the back of your mind that you need to work through? Like, is it not worth at least trying to see if there's benefits in that? I think it was that realization that made me go through that journey for the first time. And now that I've got a taste of the benefits and I can credit a lot of my growth towards it, there is no way in hell I'm actually looking at getting that out of my system. I want to hold on to that for my lifelong journey in becoming my best self every step of the way. With that being said, Camille, meditation is one of the practices. And before we wrap up, in the spirit of better mental health, I wanted to see what other practices we can bring in, if not at least briefly mention. So we talked a lot about meditation. I want to remind the importance of journaling and how much it helped me. And I'd love for you in a second to talk a little bit about how you journal versus maybe how I journal. Then there's also other parts like working out and exercise and why that's a big part of helping. And as you just mentioned with that forward movement study, and someone like Obama that has it in his daily practice, no matter what's happening in the world, I think it's worth mentioning that exercise is a great way to also help your mental health just as much as your physical health. And then I also talked about audiobooks, something that I think has been a great inclusion over the last year and a half in my life, something that I started doing with my Audible account. Every month I get a free token. Well, not a free token. I'm paying for that token through the subscription model, but I can use that token to buy any audiobook. And what gets fun for me is every month I think about what do I want to learn? If I want to learn about meditation, it actually resulted in why I bought Joe Dispenza's book and listened to it, because I wanted to learn a bit more about how meditation works. So thinking about what you want to work on, what you want to get better at, and being able to have that as, very contradictory to what we're saying, but as a passive listening tool, as a multitasking type tool, to me, the way that I think of audiobooks is this. I don't think I've ever done a good job listening to an audiobook from the beginning to end at full attention. To its credit, that's very difficult to do as an audiobook because it's always passively playing through your ears. What I do, on the other hand, is I've given myself permission to listen to it with as much attention as I can passively, because I thought of it as it's better than not having it at all. So when I go for my long drives, let's say like a 2 hour drive that I frequently find myself doing on my date nights, I think about the fact that I could take in 2 hours of content with maybe at 60 to 70% attention rate. To me, that's far better than listening to my favorite song for the 300th time. And to me, I get a lot more value from that. The other advantage of audiobooks is being able to go back to a chapter that really spoke to me and listening to that a few more times, which allows me to retain better information. So that to me has become a huge part of my actions. And the beautiful thing about having audiobooks in my practice is that it doesn't just end at listening and learning. It comes in through things like this podcast show. It comes in through things like better conversations with others. It also comes in through the things that I do day to day and the ideas that I get. The journal that we released 2 weeks ago, they came out of content that I've been consuming and understanding that there's a need for this and that there's benefits to this. And because of that, it resulted in the release. So I would say those are a big part of it. I'm also going to throw in recording this podcast with you. I think it's worth noting because I've been thinking about the benefits of listening to this podcast, and there's this feeling of euphoria that I get every single time we're done recording. Like, I'm fired up, I'm energetic, and I love that it's on a Sunday because it lets me start the new week on a good note. And I don't think I give enough credit to it. I know I frequently say I love these conversations with you because it helps me, but on a large scale, when I think about what's helping my mental health, Camille, is getting on these calls with you every Sunday, having a laser focus on a topic and listening and learning and chatting with you in order to allow me to get this almost like an injection of motivation every week that I get to take back into the week. So I will include that in my practice. As we wrap up, Camille, I'd love to get your thoughts on what practices you have that maybe the listeners could start implementing into their life.
We share a lot of the same ones. I have to say as well before I continue on to that path, um, if it helps to know that the yogis actually believe that that would be a great way to actually learn. That you learn without having that external barrier of these distractions, and become more receptive to that information because of that. And also, it's been shown in science that if you do a mental task and then you do something like exercise, like not intensely, but like go on a walk, maybe even a jog, or even just do something restful, like non-rest techniques, then you have better retention and you actually do learn. So I'm just gonna throw that out there so you don't think that you're doing things inefficiently, because that the science, you can use the science to actually help you prove that you're doing something in the correct manner. But my practices are pretty much similar. So we discussed meditation, journaling. I do journaling especially is helpful if you constantly have a certain memory that really does bother you, or you get the same feeling over and over again. To actually write down how you're feeling and where it comes from is can be curative, because you get to see your thoughts, your emotions on the paper, and then you could kind of see like where's this coming from? Why is this affecting me? Like this sounds strange. And then you become more naturally curious and explore to, and you have to formulate those thoughts in a way that are like a cohesive enough to create a sentence. So it can change and reformat how those memories are, because that feeling that you get from that memory, if it's powerful enough to haunt you, it's formed. It creates the same energy as the age it was formed. So if it was a childhood memory, for instance, when you're a child, it's very hard to learn how to manage these different things. Where now you can look at it as an adult and be like, huh, okay, I know how to handle this now. And then just having that is enough to let go. And to it's actually funny enough that you brought that up, because I'm reading Beyond Order by Jordan Peterson, which is his third book, and he actually has that chapter dedicated to. I forget what the rule specifically is called, but it is, if something is bothering you, write it down. So that is a huge practice I've used, and we talk in stories, and pretty much to us our stories are more real than our facts. So it's important to understand what story you're telling yourself, and when it comes to these memories as well, how they affect you can be changed by the way you write the story. So journaling is huge, and that's the way I journal, is specifically for that. But of course, I've recently discovered an amazing product called Journey to My Best Self, which I have been using, and that has been really helpful. So the gratitude practices, the checklist on the things that I have as my own personal priorities, I find that helpful. Exercise as well. I have to say that uh, physical movement is so important to me that it's just I can't live without it. I'm trying to think as well. Like there are a lot of other little things that I do naturally. I'm curious
Yeah.
about. Um,
I'm also gonna throw in maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when I based on how I know you, like I think like your recreational activity, like playing the guitar, is a practice that I would put in there. But also
yes,
like your nutrition, I think like
exactly.
like I think that's. Do you want to speak a little bit on those? Because I know that's huge for you,
Oh,
and
yeah.
in fact you've influenced a lot of that with me. I'd love for you to share that for the listeners as well.
Oh, for sure. Yes. So nutrition and sleep are huge. Like to go to sleep on like the same time every night is is so powerful that it will change your life for sure. Especially if you're someone that's depressed, just having that can actually fix a lot of your issues. But nutrition, I find, is very important. So, I mean, it depends. There's a lot of different camps, and it's become a very dogmatic kind of thing to talk about. But generally speaking, when you say eat healthy food and don't eat processed stuff, people understand what that means. And you can go a step further and you have specific goals. I use an app called Chronometer, and that when you put in your foods, like your daily diet, whatever, it can tell you what you're deficient in. And from there, I learned to supplement other things that I'm deficient in or eat foods that will prevent those deficiencies. So I highly recommend that because when you have your nutrition on point, like it doesn't feel like you age as much. Honestly, I have more energy now than I even had like 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm almost 30 as opposed to like my late 20s. Actually, even in my early 20s,
Yeah.
I have more energy than I've had in my early 20s just because of nutrition. Well, and of course
Dude,
exercise too, but
dude, like
yeah.
I am 35 and I feel younger than my entire 20s, and I can honestly credit a lot of that towards my physical health because it affects me mentally just as much. I when I went on this vacation, like I gave myself a pass to pig out. In fact, I would say I overly pigged out. Like I made it a rule that we get dessert at every dinner we go to, and I made a rule we get appetizers. And my justification was it's okay because I know I'm going to be able to get back on track, which I have to say I have been well on that path since I've returned. However, every day in that vacation, I felt like shit. Like I felt
Yeah.
awful. Like I actually have a distaste for bad food, unhealthy food, even though usually you'd crave that because of how much I've fueled, like I like fed myself up with it. So I agree with you completely. Like we don't often see it when we see progressive growth. It's sometimes hard to remember how shitty it felt. But man, you give yourself a couple cheat days in a row and you get a very quick reminder that it is not a fun feeling. Like it's not, I don't see, like forget the health benefits, the fact that you're in better shape if you eat better. It just doesn't feel good. And when it doesn't feel good physically, there's a mental, a part of you mentally that's putting your attention on how bad it feels. And that doesn't feel good either. So I agree with you completely on that diet part.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've even had like a days where I tried having like little protein and honestly I felt like garbage. So that is a huge thing. You got to feed your mind as well. And so focusing on the things you enjoy, also on the relationships you have. Being social and actually talking to people about how you feel is super important for your mental health. And that's how you actually maintain your sanity, so to speak. I think that's a part of the reason during this pandemic a lot of people had a hard time and people had to like start moving in back to their parents and stuff is for that very reason, because if you're isolated for a long time you can't survive. It's actually kind of true. Even in infants will die even if you give them food and water but you don't interact with them, they will actually die. So it is a huge thing for your mental health.
When you told me that thing about infants not getting attention and actually not actually getting someone holding them for a period of time they pass out, I was actually shocked by it when you said that. But there was a movie that just came out called Old. I don't know if you saw it, but I can tell you what's in the trailer without spoiling it, which is the fact that people end up in this island and they find themselves aging in minutes when they're in this island, and they couldn't figure out what on earth was happening. Now here is where I'm going to say spoiler alert for those that want to watch the movie. But at one point, there's a baby that is born in the middle of this island during all the festivities that are happening there, and because of how rapidly they're growing, the baby dies instantly. And then the doctor that was there that was like looking into what happened with the baby, they found out that it happened because it wasn't getting attention, and because of how quickly it was growing up, it couldn't survive that, even though it had food and everything else. Like that to me, I was like, wow, how soon is it that Camille mentioned that it's actually being brought into a lot of these narratives, and it's so true. So I agree, man. That I'm so glad you said relationships is a great practice for mental health, and who you spend time with and what you do when you spend time with them. Like there's a lot, you can be around amazing people, but if you're doing things that make you unhappy, there's a very high probability that you're gonna be unhappy, but also have resentment towards them as if it was their fault. So it is very important to have those conversations with your friends. I think that's a very healthy thing to do. It's not always easy, but it's worth bringing up and saying, this is what I think I like doing. What are your thoughts? I have that in my relationship with Priya. We talk a lot about what we do that makes us feel good, and we try those activities out. And sometimes if it's something that I haven't done, I'll try it to see if I also feel good doing it. And if I feel good doing it, I'll do it again. If I don't feel good doing it, then I won't do it again, but at least now I know. And she's the same way. But being able to, as we talked about previously with past relationships, is blend those colors together. I think there's a lot of opportunities to find a common ground with blending those colors and really finding something that makes you feel good. And I encourage people to do that all the time. But this to me, I think is a huge practice. But this podcast, and I don't want to do this in a way that sounds promotional, because I'm not going to say we're the only ones that does this. I want to encourage people to take time and learn from other people's experiences. Like, I can't speak about this enough, with what a great opportunity that we have, that we don't have to learn from only our family members and our closest friends and relatives. That we have access to what may be infinite sources of information of people that have experienced things that maybe you're going through right now. And the fact that you can find out what their experience was, the fact that it's a conversation, you can actually input questions and maybe get responses. This could be on social media by sending someone a direct message that shared a similar story. This could be on YouTube, watching a video and sending them, writing something in the comments, where now it's not just the author, but a community of people. It's like going on message boards like Reddit and participating in themed conversations. It's like sending an email out to the podcast host of any show that stood out to you, and you have some questions and some thoughts. I encourage you to participate in those conversations and take advantage of the fact that there's really nothing in this world that you have to go through alone. Whether it's about getting professional help, or whether it's about the fact that you can reach out to someone that's experiencing something similar and exchange notes, you have the ability to do that every single day. And if you have the technology to listen to this episode right now, you have everything you need in order to be able to get that assistance. And I implore you to use that. I share my story a lot in my keynotes about how I was this young, super shy, extremely terrified, anxiety filled individual that didn't know how to ask for help. And I went through so many challenges, financially, emotionally, mentally, relationships that were lost, wasn't doing well in school and getting kicked out. And the hardest thing I found was raising my hand and asking for help. And because I never did that, I never got that help. And I'm so grateful now of being able to get the help that I have in order to get to where I am in my life, that it left such a big chip on my shoulder, Camille, that I dedicated my career into helping others out in the same way. And I do it through things like this podcast show, through things like releasing a book and journals, to getting on stage and speaking, to content on social media. And I hope every single day that I do that, it's giving that other individuals an opportunity that are maybe also afraid to raise up their hand. But please know that you're not in it alone. This statement that I'm saying over and over again, because today is World Mental Health Day, I'm seeing the statement, it's okay to not be okay. And I want to reinstate that, followed up by, you're not alone, and there's a lot of people here that's available to help. And Camille, I'm so grateful that you come out here week after week and give your best, not only sharing your most personal stories, but practical ways that you articulate so well that people could apply to their life. This is just a small version of how much you do for me through our friendship over the years that I've got to know you. When I think about who has really helped me with my personal growth and get out of the most difficult situations in my life, you're right there on the top. And because of that, I'm so grateful that you're doing this with me and helping others as well. If not through my words and my stories and my encouragement, I hope it's through yours that they get the value that they need in order to get out of a bad place.
I'm super grateful for everything that you've done, and like you've actually nurtured me and kind of like coached me to do this. I wouldn't have been able to do it myself, so I don't take that for granted. I'm really appreciative of everything you've done, and I mean, I attribute you to a lot of my success as well and a lot of my confidence. You've helped me through a lot of dark shit, and I mean, I can't imagine what I would have been without you. So I'm really grateful and thank you. It really
Right
means a
back
lot.
at Yeah, right back at you, brother. I mean, I think the beauty is finding each other and helping each other along the way. And I hope every single person that listens to this episode can do the same thing and really do it themselves. I want to sign off on this episode by just reminding you that all we do here every single day is share our thoughts, our opinions, our expertise, and our stories. We share our experiences here every single day, hoping that there's a benefit that you can get out of it. But if you're looking for professional help, I do encourage you to visit websites that will allow you to get that. So for our Canadian viewers, please go visit CMHA, which is a Canadian Mental Health Association.com. .ca, and then the Americans, you have the American Mental Health Association. You'll be able to get help there. But from our side, I really hope you were able to get even 1% of benefit that you can apply to yourself to be able to help your mental health and get better every single day. Camille, next week we are officially dropping chapter 10, which means after 9 solid episodes of giving our best every single day, we're going to be finally joining the double digit club. And I want you to know, as someone that's been in the podcast space for a long time, how rare that is. The stat actually says that about, I think it's 80% of people that start a podcast show don't make it to double digits because they give up and they lose consistency and they lose the drive, or they're not getting more than 3 listeners, and that upsets them and makes them quit. I want to congratulate you, as this was a silly idea we had while you were in Poland and I was down here. We talked about, man, I can't wait for the day you and I could set up a microphone together and do this. And our hopes down the road is still to be able to do it in a shared podcast space together. But for what we were able to do, I want to congratulate you on your first podcast show and being able to truly deliver not only on consistent content, but quality content, approximately 2 hours per episode. And I wouldn't be doing this with anyone else. So congratulations, man, on such a great ride that's leading us to chapter 10 that happens next week.
Thank you so much. And like I said, I can't imagine doing this with anyone else. So thank you. I really do appreciate it. And I did recognize that, yeah, the next one is 10, our 10th. And I was kind of blown away by that. I'm like, oh my God, wow, 10 episodes. That's that's just amazing to me.
You think about 10 episodes, an average of 2 hours, almost 20 hours worth of content, man. Just take that
Yeah.
in. You and I sat in a room, in this virtual room for 20 hours, throwing our best into the ring. And I'm so proud of what this podcast show has become. I go back so frequently and listen to this. As a matter of fact, on my 5 hour flight both ways on my vacation, I downloaded our episodes to re-listen to it because I enjoyed that much. Not just for the enjoyment of the fact that I get to do this with one of my closest friends, but the fact that I get to do this and learn from you and get motivated every single week. So I'm excited to be back next Sunday as we hit the double digit club and get real comfy, bro, because the triple digit is a long way away. I truly believe that we can get there. Even if it takes us a few seasons, we'll make it happen. But Camille, as always, thank you so much for being part of this. And I'm excited to keep this going next week.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much.
For my listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're listening on an audio platform or device, I encourage you to hit the subscribe or follow button so that you can get notified every single time we drop a new episode. And if you really are getting value from this, I want to encourage you to write us a review. We've been receiving some private reviews. We've seen some ratings up on Apple iTunes, and we're forever grateful. And as you know, we read these reviews out on air on these episodes. And for my YouTube viewers, thank you so much for watching us on camera. The only reason we even dress up kind of nice is to give you guys some decent aesthetics to work with while we're speaking with you. And we encourage you to do the same and hit the like and subscribe button so that you can help get this message out to more people, but also get notified every single time we go live. From myself and Camille, we thank you for tuning in again, and we'll see you again next week. Take care, everyone.